The man who would command the Soviet Union for nearly 3 decades stands before a sea of faces, his voice calm yet commanding, his words inspiring both loyalty and dread. His name was Joseph Stalin. He is remembered not only as a leader but as a figure whose actions defined the course of history and reshaped the world's understanding of power and control. Who was Stalin, and how did he ascend to become one of the most feared dictators of all time? To understand Stalin's rise, we must first grasp the turbulent world that gave him his opportunity. The early 20th century was a time of monumental change for Russia. For centuries, the Romanov dynasty ruled with autocratic authority, wielding power over a vast empire. But the cracks in this system grew larger as the 19th century gave way to the 20th. Social inequality, economic struggles, and the pressures of war had brought the Russian Empire to the brink of collapse. By 1917, the people's anger boiled over, leading to the Russian Revolution and the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II. What followed was chaos. In the vacuum left by the monarchy, various political factions battled for control of Russia's future. Among them was the Bolshevik Party, a Marxist group led by Vladimir Lenin. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power, promising to build a state based on equality and the principles of socialism. But this promise came with a price, a brutal civil war which pitted the Bolsheviks, the Reds, against their opponents, the Whites. The war devastated the country, leaving millions dead and the economy in ruins. It was in this crucible of revolution and war that Stalin began his rise. Born in 1878 as Ioseb Vissarionis Dzhugashvili in the small Georgian town of Gori, Stalin came from humble beginnings. The son of a cobbler and a laundress, his early life was marked by hardship and ambition. He attended a seminary to study for the priesthood, but he was drawn instead to the revolutionary ideas sweeping through Russia. Joining the Bolshevik movement, he proved himself a loyal and resourceful operative. His ability to organize strikes, evade capture, and secure funding for the party, often through violent means, earned him a reputation as a man who could get things done. By the time of the October Revolution, Stalin had positioned himself as a key figure within the Bolshevik leadership. Yet in the shadow of Lenin, his role remained largely administrative. He was appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1922, a role that seemed minor at first. However, it would become the foundation of his power. The position gave him control over party appointments, allowing him to place loyal allies in key positions while sidelining his rivals. When Lenin died in 1924, a fierce struggle for leadership erupted. Stalin's main rival was Leon Trotsky, a charismatic intellectual who had been instrumental in the revolution and the Civil War. While Trotsky appealed to ideology and theory, Stalin operated behind the scenes, using his network of supporters to outmaneuver his opponents. By the late 1920s, he had consolidated his position as the undisputed leader of the Soviet Union. This documentary will explore the key moments and policies that defined Stalin's rule. From the sweeping changes of the 5-year plans to the horrors of the Great Purge, from his role in World War II to his lasting influence on the Soviet Union and the world, Stalin's legacy is one of power wielded at an unimaginable cost. We will examine how a man of humble origins rose to dominate a superpower, and what his story tells us about the nature of leadership fear and the consequences of absolute authority. To understand the man Stalin became, we must look closely at the environment that shaped him. He was born on December 18, 1878, in the town of Gori, located in the Caucasus region of the Russian Empire. Known then as Ioseb Vissarionis Dzhugashvili, his early years were anything but privileged. His father, Bessarion, was a cobbler who struggled with alcoholism and reportedly had a violent temper. His mother, Kiki, worked as a laundress, determined to give her son a better life despite their poverty. Young Stalin grew up in an atmosphere of conflict and hardship. Gori itself was a rough town, where disputes were often settled with fists rather than words. Despite these challenges, Kiki managed to enroll her son in a local church school, hoping he might one day become a priest. It was here that Stalin first demonstrated his sharp intellect and drive. Excelling in his studies, he earned a scholarship to the Tiflis Theological Seminary in 1894. For a time, it seemed that a life in the clergy awaited him, but the seminary proved to be a turning point, not in the way his mother had hoped. Instead of embracing the religious teachings, Stalin became exposed to the radical political ideas that were spreading across the empire. The works of Karl Marx and other revolutionary thinkers captivated him, offering a vision of a society free from the oppression he had known as a child. By 1899, Stalin had abandoned his studies, a decision that would sever his ties with the seminary but solidify his commitment to the revolutionary cause. In the years that followed, Stalin's activities brought him into direct conflict with the Tsarist authorities. He joined the Bolsheviks, a faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party led by Vladimir Lenin, and quickly made a name for himself as a skilled organizer and strategist. Whether it was planning strikes or distributing underground newspapers, Stalin's determination and ruthlessness set him apart. His methods were often harsh. He was involved in bank robberies to fund the Bolshevik movement and was arrested multiple times, enduring exile in Siberia on several occasions. Despite these hardships, Stalin's belief in the revolutionary cause never wavered. He adopted the name Stalin, meaning man of steel, a reflection of the image he wished to project, strong, unyielding, and impervious to opposition. This new identity was not just symbolic. It marked his transformation from a provincial revolutionary to a key player on the national stage. Archival images show a young Stalin with a thick mustache and piercing eyes, a figure already bearing the intensity that would come to define his later years. Tsarist Russia, with its rigid hierarchy and widespread poverty, provided the perfect backdrop for his rise. As he worked to undermine the old regime, Stalin's cunning and ambition grew, traits that would later serve him well in the volatile world of Bolshevik politics. This segment of Stalin's life reveals the roots of his character, a man shaped by adversity, fueled by ideology, and unafraid to use force to achieve his goals. From the dusty streets of Gori to the revolutionary circles of Tiflis, the foundations of Stalin's legacy were being laid, brick by brick, one calculated step at a time. The death of Vladimir Lenin in January 1924 set the stage for a power struggle that would shape the future of the Soviet Union. As Lenin's health deteriorated in the years prior, speculation about his successor had grown. Among the candidates, two figures stood out: Leon Trotsky, the brilliant orator and military strategist, and Joseph Stalin, the shrewd and calculating general secretary of the Communist Party. Trotsky had been one of the most prominent leaders of the revolution. His role in organizing the Red Army during the Civil War made him a hero to many within the party. Stalin, on the other hand, was less visible. His position as general secretary, a role he had held since 1922, seemed administrative and unremarkable. But behind the scenes, Stalin was laying the groundwork for his ascendancy. Stalin understood the importance of alliances. Over the years, he had built a network of loyal supporters within the Communist Party. His role as general secretary gave him control over party appointments, allowing him to place allies in key positions while sidelining potential rivals. At the same time, he cultivated an image of modesty and dedication to the party, contrasting sharply with Trotsky's intellectualism and perceived arrogance. In the immediate aftermath of Lenin's death, Stalin moved quickly to consolidate his position. He formed a temporary alliance with Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev, two influential members of the Politburo, to isolate Trotsky. Together, they accused Trotsky of factionalism, a charge that carried severe consequences in the tightly controlled Communist Party. By 1925, Trotsky had been removed from his position as Commissar of War. But Stalin's alliances were never meant to last. Once Trotsky was sidelined, he turned against Zinoviev and Kamenev, accusing them of opposing the party line. By 1927, both men had been expelled from the party. Trotsky, too, faced further persecution. In 1929, he was exiled from the Soviet Union entirely, leaving Stalin as the undisputed leader of the Communist Party. Stalin's rise was not just a product of political maneuvering. It was also a reflection of his ability to adapt and outmaneuver his rivals. He skillfully used Lenin's legacy to legitimize his own authority. Lenin's writings were selectively quoted to support Stalin's policies, while critical comments Lenin had made about Stalin were suppressed. The cult of Lenin became, in many ways, a stepping stone for the cult of Stalin. The optimism of the early revolutionary years was giving way to a more authoritarian regime. As Stalin consolidated power, the structures of the Soviet state became increasingly centralized. The Communist Party, once a vehicle for revolutionary change, was now a tool for maintaining Stalin's authority. By the end of the 1920s, Stalin had achieved what many thought impossible. He had risen from obscurity to become the most powerful man in the Soviet Union. His calculated moves and relentless ambition had secured his dominance, but at a cost. The internal struggles and purges that marked his ascent left the party fractured and the Soviet people under increasing surveillance. How did Stalin's calculated moves secure his dominance over the Soviet Union? The answer lies in his understanding of power, its use, its manipulation, and its consolidation. In Stalin's hands, power was not just a means to an end, it was an end in itself. This understanding would define the years to come as Stalin transformed the Soviet Union and reshaped its destiny. By the late 1920s, Stalin had solidified his control over the Soviet Union. Now he turned his attention to transforming the nation into a global power. To achieve this, he launched a series of ambitious programs that would redefine the Soviet Union's economy, society, and political landscape, but at an immense human cost. Stalin's vision for the Soviet Union centered on rapid industrialization and the collectivization of agriculture. The first five-year plan, introduced in 1928, marked the beginning of this transformation. Its goals were staggering: to build factories, expand infrastructure, and increase production across key industries such as steel, coal, and machinery. Stalin believed that only by industrializing at an unprecedented pace could the Soviet Union defend itself against external threats and compete with the capitalist powers of the West. Massive industrial complexes were constructed in cities like Magnitogorsk and Stalingrad. Railways stretched across the vast expanse of the Soviet Union, linking resource-rich regions with centers of production. The Soviet Union would transform itself from a predominantly agrarian society into an industrial giant within a single decade, but this transformation came at a tremendous cost. The five-year plans prioritized output above all else. Quotas were set at levels that were often impossible to achieve, leading to widespread falsification of production reports and immense pressure on workers. Those who failed to meet targets were accused of sabotage and faced harsh penalties, including imprisonment or execution. While the industrial sector expanded, Stalin turned his attention to agriculture. He believed that collectivizing farms, replacing individual peasant holdings with large, state-controlled operations, would increase efficiency and ensure a stable food supply for the growing urban workforce. However, collectivization met fierce resistance from many peasants who saw it as an assault on their way of life. The Ukrainian countryside, in particular, became a battleground. Stalin's policies forced millions of peasants to surrender their land, livestock, and grain to the state. Those who resisted were labeled kulaks, or wealthy peasants, and targeted for arrest, exile, or execution. Entire villages were wiped out, and dissent was brutally crushed. The human toll of collectivization was catastrophic. In Ukraine, the policies led to the Holodomor, a man-made famine that claimed millions of lives between 1932 and 1933. The term Holodomor, meaning death by hunger, reflects the scale of this tragedy. For Stalin, the famine was not merely an unintended consequence of his policies. Evidence suggests that it was used as a weapon to break resistance and enforce compliance. Grain quotas were raised even as starvation spread, and relief efforts were deliberately withheld. Despite the suffering, Stalin declared the policies a success. By the mid-1930s, the Soviet Union had become one of the world's leading industrial powers. Steel production soared, and cities sprang up where none had existed before. These achievements were celebrated as proof of the superiority of the socialist system. Bold slogans proclaim the triumph of the workers, while smiling faces obscure the harsh realities of life under Stalin. Was the transformation of the Soviet Union worth the price? For Stalin, the answer was clear, but for the millions who suffered and died, the price was incalculable. The industrial base built during this period would play a crucial role in the Soviet Union's ability to resist Nazi Germany during World War II. However, the scars of collectivization and famine would remain etched in the collective memory of the Soviet people, a stark reminder of the sacrifices demanded by Stalin's vision of progress. By the mid-1930s, Joseph Stalin's grip on the Soviet Union was absolute, but his reign of terror was just beginning. Paranoia and a relentless quest for control drove Stalin to eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat, real or imagined. This era, known as the Great Purge, would become one of the darkest chapters in Soviet history. The Great Purge, which spanned from 1936 to 1938, was Stalin's response to growing fear of dissent within the Communist Party and the broader Soviet society. What began as a campaign to root out political opponents quickly expanded into a nationwide hunt for enemies of the state. No one was safe. Party officials, military leaders, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens alike became targets of Stalin's wrath. Many of these so-called trials were little more than performances with predetermined outcomes. The charges ranged from espionage to conspiracy, but the evidence was often fabricated. Under Stalin, confession was king. Suspects were subjected to brutal interrogations, often involving physical and psychological torture, until they confessed to crimes they had not committed. These confessions were then used to justify executions or sentences to the gulags. The purges reached their peak during the Moscow trials, a series of highly publicized show trials targeting prominent Bolshevik leaders, including Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Bukharin. These men, who had once been Stalin's comrades in the revolution, now faced execution as traitors to the very cause they had fought to establish. Survivor testimonies provide a chilling insight into the climate of fear that gripped the Soviet Union during this time. One survivor recalls, "You never knew when the knock on the door would come. People vanished overnight. Families were torn apart. To live was to fear." As the purge expanded, the military became a major target. Stalin feared that the Red Army's leadership might pose a threat to his authority. The result was a devastating purge of the officer corps, with thousands of commanders executed or imprisoned. This decimation of military leadership would have dire consequences for the Soviet Union's preparedness in the face of World War II. Prisoners, many of them victims of the purges, were forced to work under inhumane conditions in mines, forests, and factories. Estimates of the number of people who perished in the gulags vary, but historians agree that millions suffered and died as a result of Stalin's policies. For those who survived, the scars, both physical and emotional, would last a lifetime. Propaganda posters from the era tell a contrasting story, depicting Stalin as a benevolent leader protecting the Soviet Union from internal enemies. This propaganda served to mask the reality of Stalin's reign of terror, convincing many that the purges were necessary for the survival of socialism. The elimination of so many skilled professionals and intellectuals created a vacuum that would hinder Soviet progress for decades. Yet, for Stalin, the purges were a grim success. By eliminating any potential opposition, he secured his unchallenged dominance over the Soviet Union. Millions perished under Stalin's paranoia, as loyalty to the state became a matter of life and death. As the 1930s gave way to the 1940s, the Soviet Union faced one of the greatest challenges in its history: the invasion by Nazi Germany. In June 1941, Operation Barbarossa shattered the non-aggression pact between Stalin and Hitler, plunging the USSR into World War II. The conflict would become a defining moment for Stalin as a leader, revealing both his strategic acumen and his unyielding brutality. The initial months of the war were catastrophic for the Soviet Union. German forces advanced rapidly, capturing vast territories and encircling entire Soviet armies. Stalin, initially paralyzed by the scale of the invasion, had underestimated Hitler's ambitions. Stalin's miscalculation left the Soviet Union unprepared for the ferocity of the German onslaught, resulting in devastating losses. However, Stalin quickly regrouped. From his headquarters in Moscow, he oversaw a massive mobilization effort, rallying the Soviet people with fiery rhetoric and brutal discipline. For Stalin, defeat was not an option. He declared a policy of not one step back, enforcing harsh punishments for retreat or surrender. The turning point of the war came at the Battle of Stalingrad in 1942 to 1943. This brutal confrontation, fought in the city that bore Stalin's name, became a symbol of Soviet resistance. The battle was fought street by street, house by house, with both sides suffering immense casualties. Stalin's orders were clear: hold the city at all costs. Over 1 million Soviet soldiers and civilians perished in the Battle of Stalingrad. But the Soviet victory marked a turning point in the war as the Red Army began to push the Germans back toward Berlin. Stalin's leadership during the war extended beyond the battlefield. At the Yalta Conference in February 1945, he met with Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt to discuss the post-war order. Stalin skillfully negotiated for Soviet influence in Eastern Europe, laying the groundwork for the Cold War. His wartime alliances were pragmatic, driven by a desire to secure the Soviet Union's position as a global superpower. Yet, Stalin's wartime leadership was not without controversy. Was Stalin a hero of the war, or were his victories overshadowed by his ruthlessness? Share your thoughts in the comment section. The human cost of his decisions was staggering. His scorched earth policy, which ordered the destruction of infrastructure to deny it to the advancing Germans, left countless Soviet citizens homeless and destitute. Additionally, Stalin's paranoia extended even to his own military commanders. Many of the Red Army's most capable leaders had been purged during the 1930s, weakening the Soviet military at a critical moment. Those who survived often operated under the constant threat of Stalin's wrath. Despite these flaws, Stalin emerged from World War II as a victorious leader, his image bolstered by Soviet propaganda. To some, Stalin was the savior of the Soviet Union, the man who defeated Hitler and secured peace. To others, he was a tyrant whose disregard for human life cast a dark shadow over his achievements. In the aftermath of World War II, Joseph Stalin emerged as one of the most powerful leaders on the global stage. However, his post-war years would reveal the enduring complexity of his rule, marked by the Cold War's emergence, his relentless grip on power, and the shadow he cast over the Soviet Union long after his death. The Soviet Union's victory in World War II had elevated Stalin's status both domestically and internationally. As the leader of a superpower, Stalin sought to expand Soviet influence across the globe, setting the stage for a prolonged ideological struggle with the United States. The Cold War began as the world split into two opposing camps, the capitalist West and the communist East. Stalin's policies of control extended beyond the Soviet Union to Eastern Europe, where he established a network of satellite states under Soviet domination. This expansion was not without resistance. In countries like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany, Stalin's iron-fisted approach sparked unrest, laying the foundations for decades of tension and rebellion against Soviet rule. At home, Stalin continued to rule with absolute authority. Despite the victory in World War II, life for ordinary Soviet citizens remained harsh. Resources were diverted to rebuilding the Soviet military and advancing the nuclear arms race, leaving the population to endure widespread shortages and poverty. Stalin's paranoia persisted until the end of his life. In his later years, Stalin's mistrust extended even to those closest to him. The so-called Doctors' Plot of 1952 to 1953, a fabricated conspiracy accusing Jewish doctors of planning to assassinate Soviet leaders, exemplified the climate of fear that defined his rule. Stalin's death on March 5, 1953, marked the end of an era. As the news of Stalin's passing spread, reactions ranged from genuine grief to cautious relief. His funeral, attended by thousands, reflected the cult of personality he had cultivated over decades. In the years following Stalin's death, his successor, Nikita Khrushchev, began a campaign to dismantle Stalin's legacy. At the 20th Party Congress in 1956, Khrushchev delivered a secret speech condemning Stalin's crimes, including the purges and the cult of personality. One historian notes, Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin was a watershed moment for the Soviet Union. It marked the beginning of a gradual shift away from the repressive policies of the past, though the path to reform was neither linear nor complete. Stalin's impact extended far beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. His actions shaped the course of the 20th century, influencing global geopolitics and the lives of millions. The Cold War, which he helped ignite, would dominate international relations for decades. Today, Stalin's legacy remains deeply contested. To some, he is remembered as a leader who industrialized the Soviet Union and led it to victory in World War II. To others, he is a symbol of tyranny and unimaginable human suffering. How should history remember Joseph Stalin as a builder of a superpower or as one of history's most ruthless dictators? The answer, perhaps, lies in the enduring lessons of his rule and the warnings it offers for the future. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union transformed from a largely agrarian society into a global industrial and military power. His 5-year plans and rapid industrialization built the foundation for the USSR's superpower status, enabling it to play a decisive role in World War II and emerge as a leader in the Cold War. The cost of Stalin's vision was paid in human lives. Millions starved, millions were imprisoned, and millions more were executed under his reign. One expert notes, Stalin was a figure of contradictions. His policies modernized the Soviet Union, but at an enormous human cost. He defeated Hitler, yet he ruled with a brutality that mirrored the very enemy he fought against. Stalin's mistrust extended to all aspects of Soviet life. From the purges of his inner circle to the suppression of dissent across the nation, his need for absolute power left no room for opposition. Yet, for many in the Soviet Union, Stalin was seen as a hero. Propaganda portrayed him as the great father of the nation. For those who benefited from the industrial and military advancements, Stalin's rule symbolized strength and progress. Joseph Stalin was both the architect of a superpower and a symbol of terror. His policies shaped the 20th century, but his methods left scars that remain to this day. His legacy is a mirror reflecting the dangers of absolute power, the cost of progress, and the fragility of human rights. The story of Joseph Stalin is not merely one of a man, but of a nation shaped by his vision and haunted by his methods. It is a cautionary tale for all who seek power and a reminder of the human cost of unchecked authority. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating explorations of history's most influential leaders.